Hello, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, where we're exploring pathways and practices that support us in living a life that is grounded, that is spacious, that's connected, and that helps us remember ourselves. We do this through conversations between a Reiki teacher and practitioners in the realms of healing, psychology, art, spirituality, science, and magic, exploring the connections between these diverse practices to illuminate the healing patterns that humans have created throughout our existence. Thank you so much for joining us. We're glad to have you for this leg of the journey. And today we are circling in with a new friend, with Craig Merriweather. Welcome, Craig.
Oh, thank you, Michaela. I really appreciate being here. I've been looking forward to this for a while now, so glad
Yeah.
we're here. Yeah.
So we get to talk about something that has been interesting to me for quite some time, that I have some personal experience with, but haven't gotten to really dive into in this form of exploratory conversation. Really excited to be able to talk with you about both the clinical and the spiritual aspects of hypnotherapy. So really looking forward to diving into that. And just to help us kind of land here together, to set the scene, to welcome our friends into the space, I'd love to just share a little bit about what I know about you already, about the work that you bring into the space, and then we'll use that as a bit of a diving board into whatever wants to be said. Sound good?
Yeah.
Great.
Perfect.
So, Craig, you are a mindset coach. You're a clinical hypnotherapist helping people eliminate negative emotions and trauma so that they can reach their potential. Thank you for doing that work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
a certified clinical hypnotherapist, a medical hypnosis specialist, a neuro-linguistic
Linguistic.
programming specialist.
Yeah.
I got it. And the founder of the Arizona Integrative Hypnotherapy, helping people eliminate the negative emotions and limiting beliefs that might keep them from reaching their full potential.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for over 12 years, you have been helping people to heal from early childhood trauma, helping cancer patients with pain control, veterans with PTSD, students with test anxiety, relatable, entrepreneurs with confidence, athletes with peak performance, and anyone who may be dealing with overwhelm, fear, or anxiety. I imagine those of you listening can recognize yourself somewhere in that list, right? We've
Yeah.
landed there somewhere. So you are also the founder of Divinus Arcana, hypnotherapy for spiritual healing, helping people to heal with past life regression therapy, spirit world regression, and connecting people with their spirit guides and ancestors. And my understanding is that that might be an aspect of your work that you don't necessarily get to talk about as publicly. And so I'm hoping we get to
Yeah.
land in some of that territory in our conversation today.
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you, one, for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate that. And yeah, a lot of my conversations, whether talking on a podcast or just out in the world over a consultation call, is generally on the more clinical side of things. Like you mentioned, the uh, dealing with people who have gone through trauma, dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, or just having feeling stuck, reaching their goals, whatever that may be in relationships or business or athletics or something. And it's extraordinarily rewarding work to do to help you with that. What fascinates me the most, though, is this more. We were going back and forth with emails and things, setting this up, and we kept using the word esoteric and mystical side of things, especially with the work you do, and using the power of your subconscious mind to kind of access that higher self, that inner wisdom, or even reaching your guides. This isn't something new. Of course, we've known people have been doing this kind of work for thousands upon thousands and thousands of years, whether over in Egypt or India or the Aboriginals of Australia or down in South America. So we know people have been doing this, whether with plant medicine or with deep meditation work. What's interesting is accessing this realm just by relaxing the mind and body, and whether you call that hypnosis or trance or a meditative state, whatever you want to call it, is really fascinating. And so I love talking about it. Like I said, I don't often, it's not often the party talk you get to when you're out and
At the
about
wrong parties,
having dinner
Craig.
with friends and things, um, but it is fascinating to talk about. So like I said before, I've been really looking forward to to talking with you today.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Great. So now we know why we're here and who you are. And so I'd love to just kind of, again, continue to let us ground here in this space
Hmm.
by first asking you just how you are doing today. How's your day?
I'm doing well. It's we're recording this beginning of July. It's a beautiful summer day. I'm right in front of my office window, so I can see a slight breeze moving through the leaves and a lot of green and a lot of blue sky. And so it's a wonderful time to just have my cup of tea, and it's a wonderful time to just sit and chat with somebody about this interesting information about spirit.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, I am also doing well. There's been a lot of intensity in my world lately, in the realms of the emotions and in the realms of relationships and in the realms of reconnecting with people from the past, largely through the vehicle of funerals. I've been to a number of them.
Mm,
Just whatever reason, this is a season of life that's happening. I was watching a good friend of mine who's also been a guest here on Reiki Crossroads, Key Tyler. She practices evolutionary astrology, and she put out her monthly message today that's kind of
mm,
discussing, in general terms, the Cancer season that we're stepping inside of, where the moon is entering Cancer, and talking about the themes of that. Evolutionary astrology looks at overarching patterns and themes that can be observed in the natural world, and then kind of coaches us to find ourselves inside of those themes. And she was talking about the themes of this season being around relational health and around
mm,
reconnection and really tending to family, however we define that, and seeing where there needs to be some tending, and then also tending the home. And it's a good season for moving or for renovating or clearing out the house, and
mm.
all of those things are things that are in the midst right now. My mother is going to be moving in to the house with me, and so we're doing all kinds of house clearing, and then of course that has so much to do with relational health and connection. So I'm just a little bit buzzy with the synchronicity of that, and like, okay,
Yeah.
that was well timed, unintentional, but
Yeah.
well timed that this month is when that's happening. So that is
Well,
kind of what I'm carrying in today, is a little bit of a
yeah.
buzz on
That
relational
that's
health.
really interesting. My birthday's in a couple of weeks, and in a couple of days, my wife and I are driving to go look in on our parents.
Yeah.
We're both, my dad's 93, my mom's and her mom, my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, are in their late 80s, and so relationship tending. We're going to be doing a lot of that in this next week or so as
Yeah.
we head towards my birthday. So it's an interesting month, I guess, to for all that to be coming in and
Absolutely.
coming together.
Yeah, yeah, my birthday is the 26th of this month, so
Mm,
coming right up, tipping into Leo season. Um, Good. So
yeah.
we have oriented to how we are feeling today. Um, and I'd love to just, lead us into this conversation by thinking about and having you share a little bit about the threads that you followed to come into this work. I love that you
Mm,
give a little bit of a preface around the fact that this way of being with the world, where we have this capacity to tip into the unseen realms to help us navigate our life, is something that humans have known how to do for a long time. We all
mm,
come from people who had some form of working in the unseen realm. That's part of all of our lineage, whether or not we are connected to it. And it's part of the threads that form the tapestry of our life that are woven together. And for, something like the work that we choose to do in the world, there's so many of those threads that come together that, lead us to do what we do. And so
mm.
I love just asking folks, just in this moment, when you think about that trajectory into what led you to be in this place, what are some of the threads that are at the top of your mind right now that have been present in your life?
Well, the spiritual life has always been strong within me. Not unlike the Force being strong within Luke Skywalker. The Force is strong within that one. It's always been something that's always interested me. I was born into the Episcopal Church, meaning that the Episcopal Church was 5 blocks from our house. If it was a Methodist church, I'm sure we would have been Methodist because it was easy just to get to. We don't have to drive across town. I grew up in San Diego, California, in the late 60s and 70s and 80s. And so the Episcopal Church was a big part of my life, not just Sundays for church and Sunday school growing up, but that's where my friends were. And the youth group as I became a teenager was a big part of my life. But at the sixth grade, so somewhere around 10, 11 years old, I started going to a private school run by Baptists. So Monday through Friday, I was doing Baptist uh, education. There was a Bible class every day. Once a week, there was chapel, meaning just a big assembly where we sing and have a speaker and things like that. And then on the weekends, if not weeknights, I'd be doing stuff with my friends I had at the church I was going to. I really, really like the Episcopal Church. If people aren't familiar with what happens, and there's pretty much, Catholicism light, if you will, uh, coming from the Protestant era of England when they broke away from the Catholic Church, but they kept the candles and the robes and communion and the rituals that are just, for me, very fascinating and were attracted to me. Some of the other, the more, again, Methodist style or Baptist style churches, is fine, but I really like the more ritualistic aspects of that. I also got into the charismatic movement because Baptist school and Episcopal church on weekends wasn't enough. And so I started doing this charismatic movement when I was, 16, 17, 18. Um, as happens when you graduate high school, your friends break apart, your friend group breaks apart as they go off to other places to go to school, move away. And so I kind of left my friend group, and church wasn't that interesting anymore, being kind of the only one there. And having met uh, my wife, well, my girlfriend at the time, met when we were 19, we ended up moving to Santa Cruz, California, and we went to school there, and there opened up a whole, you know, helped me take off the glasses, if you were, for the cultures of the world, and not just the music and the dance and the food and the extraordinary people, but also their spiritual practices as well. And so I kind of put aside the more Western aspects of my spirituality and started, going, one by one, kind of exploring different cultures, different spiritualities. And but kind of found myself, at least later in life, at least the last 10 years or so, kind of moving back towards a more Western style of spirituality and the practices that I do. So that's one aspect of my life. The other aspect is that I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety, especially in my teenage years. And this is the 1980s. So they didn't even have the SSRI medications, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac, things like that. Those came out in the 90s, mid 90s, or late 90s. Uh, you know, no internet, at least that the common people had access to at any rate. And so it was books at the library, or maybe a book at a bookstore, or a magazine article, if you happened to catch it that month. And so really it was just like talk therapy. That's all you knew to do if you weren't feeling well. Oh, I struggled with that for a while. My mom struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts. And whether it was nurture and I was mirroring what I learned in the home as a way of protecting myself or just dealing with life, or it's a genetic thing, I struggle with it from the 80s and 90s. And it was really with the birth of my son in 2000 that it was just like, you gotta get my life together. It is time. And because if nothing else, what if he also struggles as well? What if this is a genetic thing, or I'm mirroring it for him in the home? And so it's time to get it together. The internet's out at that time, at least the beginning stages of the internet. And you could look up things on yahoo.com and AOL and things like that. You could actually find information. Wasn't too interested in medications as a lot of the side effects were becoming more known out there, and that didn't intrigue me very much. And so I started looking for other tools, other ways of dealing with it. And after some just working on myself and finding different methods and strategies and skills, I I ended up with this toolbox full of tools and ended up being able to join a writing contest, a book contest sponsored by Hay House, or I guess it was one of their offshoots, Hierophant publishing company. And so I just ended up writing a book about depression called Depression 180. And that led to, doing promotion for the book we all submitted a chapter to, which led to doing interviews with other people, experts on dealing with depression, doctors and other kind of therapists. And that led to wanting to do a podcast, which I ended up doing called Tipping Point Radio, and being able to interview extraordinary people like Marianne Williamson and Greg Braden and Joe Dispenza and even John McLaughlin, the great jazz guitarist, about spirituality and music. And but there came a point where it's like, well, I really love this one methodology that really helped me, and that was hypnotherapy. And I got the opportunity back in about 2014 to go study that, kind of make a midlife right hand turn and move a different direction in life. And so I did a lot of training in hypnotherapy at a wonderful school called the Hypnotherapy Academy of America. One reason I chose this school is not only just the extraordinary reputation it has, and it's like an in-person school. You go there and sit in a classroom with other people. It's 10 weeks long, so 2.5 months, 500 hours, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. But the last 2 weeks of it, so module 5, is past life regression, spirit world regression, natal regression, moving back to the womb, and this more, again, esoteric, using that word, esoteric style of therapy. So once you've moved through the clinical side of things, learning about the methodologies and the scientific validity of these techniques, and then practicing them and working with each other, by the end of that time, you're actually moving into the more mystical side of things. And so chose that school. Of course, the last 2 weeks were my very, very favorite. And since then, while I probably, of course, I don't know, half and half or maybe 60/40, depending on the week, I guess, or the month. I love doing the clinical stuff and helping people in that way, but it's really the more mystical side because that fits with my trajectory through life from, the more ritual side of the Episcopal Church through all the different cultures I was exposed to in the Central California, Santa Cruz, San Francisco, San Jose, and being able to use mind and a relaxed state of body to actually access these realms. And that's what really, really energizes me. It's really fun to do. It's really exciting, but it's also very healing, very insightful. You can find a lot of healing doing this kind of work, as I'm sure you know, doing Reiki as well. But that's maybe a long answer to a short question, but it's kind of a almost coming up to a 57-year journey here
Yeah.
and how I got here. So how I got today doing this conversation it was a interesting trip for sure.
Long, strange trip. Yeah.
Yeah, and long story.
How does it feel to kind of step back on those threads in that recitation?
It's interesting because I've in discussing hypnotherapy on some other podcasts over the last few months, and you kind of start thinking about life. Well, how did you get here? I'm like, well, that's interesting. How did I get here? And things start popping. Oh yeah, and then this happened. And oh, I forgot that I did that, and I forgot that this was a big influence on my life. I spent in the late '90s. We were living in a house where my wife and I, or my girlfriend at the time, um, we were living in a house that had a separate two-car garage that the owner had converted into a kind of a studio apartment. And in the front house was a group of guys who were all studying a uh, Indonesian martial art called Pencak Silat. And every afternoon they'd come out kind of to the carport and just practice martial arts. And it was kind of fun to watch and cool. And I was interested in the music and drumming and things like that. So kind of got involved, and they were super wonderful people. But because Indonesia is a Muslim country, they were very interested in the culture, not just studying the martial arts, but knowing more about Indonesia. And they found a Sufi teacher up in Marin who ran a pizza place, but did Sufi teachings and things, head of the Turkish Sufi order, and uh, uh, and he would sometimes come down to Santa Cruz and do these zikrs of just, and the zikr is a Zikr, and it's just this Sufi meditative ritual of just breathing deep. It's almost like breath work mixed with singing, mixed with deep ancient ritual. And we do this in the living room of the front house, or sometimes we'd go up to Marin or something. And it was very influential to me. And it's something I'd kind of forgotten about until all this, people started asking me, where do you come from?
Right.
And what do you do? And I thought, well, the Episcopal Church was very influential to me, and not so much the old hymns from, the 1600s that didn't, thrill me, but it was the candles, it was the robes. And why is that,
Yeah.
as opposed to anything else?
Yeah.
Why as a obviously very English, Craig Merriweather, you don't get more United Kingdom than that, a Celtic first name and a very, very English last name. And, we've done the genealogy thing. I'm pretty much 98% United Kingdom. Why do I have interest? Why am I attracted to the culture of the Middle East, of Persia and India and things that are not related necessarily to my heritage? And if I do connect with my ancestry and my ancestors, um, it's a straight line pretty much down through England. It's not to say that somewhere, you know, 2000 years ago I didn't have Middle Eastern ancestry, but uh, it's interesting what you're attracted to and why.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't even know why. I certainly don't know why India and the Middle East, as opposed to, because when I was in Santa Cruz, everybody loved Cuban music, and they loved Brazilian music and samba and all sorts of things that just like, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of the African countries of West Africa. And I'm like, yeah, it's nice. It's all right. But man, did you hear this new Middle Eastern group from Egypt? They're rocking it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to kind of start tracing all this again.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I mean, and once you start pulling on a thread, right, you feel the connections between
Yeah.
others. And I love this thread of ritual and of the intrigue and the beauty of, ritual for its own sake, and then also what is it that the ritual is asking us to pay attention to, and what is it putting
Mm.
space around, and noticing, right, what calls us about that. Rituals can be the sort of thing that can become they can become dead if they become kind of rote,
Mm.
and maybe we're connected to, we do them, but we're not focusing our attention on them, and we don't feel like there's a purpose, as opposed to, any spark of life that we connect with inside of that ritual becomes something completely different. And so, yeah, I appreciate hearing those threads getting pulled. Um, One of the things that we, really work with, in my practice, practicing Reiki from the perspective of its Japanese origins, is kind of settling back into those rituals and those frameworks and really asking the question, what did these mean? Like, what were these intended? What were these designed to focus our attention on?
Yeah.
Therefore, what was it designed to bring alive in our life? And, through my practice and my studies over the last 10 years, I've, answered that in a variety of ways that, can go deep and wide and complex. But in its simplest form, for me, practicing the system of Reiki is intended to help us live lives that are grounded and rooted, that are spacious, and that are connected.
Mm.
That's really deeply reflected in the energy map that's used within Japanese spirituality. And it's also very analogous and mirroring of the Celtic spirituality that's my own lineage that I've also followed the threads of. And so I'd love to, hear from you, like when you think about these qualities of living a life that's rooted, spacious, and connected, or even this concept of helping us remember ourselves. I'd love to hear how you see this work with hypnotherapy from any of the perspectives, any of the angles that you engage it. How do you see it intersecting with those aims and maybe bringing some of those aims alive for people?
Yeah, what's nice about this work is the ability of it to turn off the noise.
Mm,
Because a lot of the noise is coming from the conscious mind, conscious awareness. And by quieting that down, and what literally happens in the brain, which we have the left side of the brain, we have the right side of the brain, what happens is this logical, analytical, mathematical language, interestingly enough, language part of the brain, the left side, or the more dominant logical, analytical, mathematical language brain, quiets down.
mm,
And what really lights up when you move into that more meditative trance hypnosis state is the right side of the brain really lights up. And that's the creative, the metaphoric, the imaginative, the musical, the colorful side of the brain. Now, of course, there's crisscross and it's all really one brain, but when you watch a brain moving into that trance state, into that meditative state, into that hypnosis state, quieting it down, moving down that alpha and theta brainwave state, then you see it lighting up the right side of the brain. And so I think a lot of the work happens by quieting down that noise of the conscious world and by moving inward. And I think that's what ritual helps you to do. There's especially like those big Gothic churches that you see all over Europe from the 14, 15, 1600s, if I'm getting that era right. Um, there are probably archaeologists that are like, no, 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 that's not right. But somewhere around the 1600s, when those Gothic churches are being built, they have these huge, huge ceilings, the 600-foot ceilings. And one reasoning behind that, they think, or at least one interesting aspect of it, is that when you move your eyes up, so if you're to look above, like try to see your forehead and look your eyes straight up, when you look up like that, it actually helps you move into the alpha brainwave state. That's why a lot of somebody listening has ever done hypnotherapy. Maybe one of the introductions is before you close your eyes and go into hypnosis, I want you to stare at a spot on the wall, up on the ceiling. Maybe there's a spot in the drywall, maybe there's a shadow, maybe there's a light, or maybe there's just a window and you can look at the tall tree. And so that has you move your eyes up to look at a spot on the ceiling, again, to help you start moving into that alpha brainwave state. So I think they knew that. I think, and it's hard to justify, well, let's help people move into an alpha brainwave state by making life so much harder by building these huge Gothic churches. But certainly there's spatial anchors around these buildings set aside for ritual. But because, of course, a church, even um, a church that has, a more maybe Catholic or Episcopal look to it with altar and maybe if they're doing communion and things like that, feels different than the 24-hour gym or the movie theater or your car.
yes.
And so, and there's space set aside for ritual and for spirituality. And but I think one of the ways it helps you is that it helps you quiet down.
Mm,
Sort of like going into a library. There's just this known uh, aspect of a library that it's time to be quiet. It's time to talk in a whisper. And ritual spaces, whether it's a temple, whether it's a, a church or some other ritual site, even of course outdoors, a lot of what you see there in terms of the candles, in terms of maybe there's incense, so now you have the olfactory going to help anchor you into that space. Um, Assuming that it's just incense and not maybe hallucinogenic, like some people have been maybe finding historical reference to. And whether it's the smells, it's the sounds, it's the music, the way the music sounds within a big space like that. the way it feels, so the even the temperature of the room, it brings you to a state of moving inward. And hypnosis is very good at that. And there's nothing magical or mystical about the word hypnosis. I know that word has a lot of baggage to it because of movies and TV and the Las Vegas shows. But really, hypnosis comes from Greek mythology and the Greek god Hypnos, who is the Greek god of sleep. And back in the 1850s, there was a doctor in England by the name of Dr. James Bard, and he was a surgeon. And back in the 1850s, you didn't have fancy hospitals, you didn't have fancy anesthesia. If you're having your leg amputated, you're biting down on a stick, or maybe you're a blow to the head to knock you unconscious. And so he started using a deep, deep, deep trance state to put people so far under into trance that it looked like they're in a coma. Now, of course, as we talked about before, certainly he did not invent the trance state. Certainly over in India and Egypt and the Aboriginals of Australia and South America and all sorts of places, they're using trance in their spiritual work and their healing work thousands upon thousands of years ago. But Dr. James Bard in 1850 started using this deep trance state, needing a word to describe it to his colleagues to write about it. He decided to name this coma-like state after the Greek god of sleep. So they called it hypnosis. And since then, this relaxed state of mind and body, this altered state of consciousness, if you will, has grown to encompass all sorts of trance states, pretty much from very light alpha brainwave state to theta, all the way down to even the sleep state. Alpha, theta, delta is what's known as the hypnagogic trance state. So these lower vibrating levels of brainwave state, alpha, theta, and delta, hypnagogic trance state. And by moving the body and mind into a relaxed state, a peaceful state, a restful state, you not only can access the subconscious for healing, maybe for healing of trauma that you've been holding on to, whether it happened last week, last month, or 40 years ago, or you're struggling with some post-traumatic stress disorder, turning off the stress response, resetting the nervous system. You're allowed to do that. Your subconscious mind is that powerful. It's the one doing it in the first place for protection and for safety. Your subconscious mind is for you. It may not seem like that at times because of the hurt and the pain you're dealing with, but it's trying to keep you safe. Your subconscious mind is there for survival, which doesn't necessarily mean for your happiness or your peace or your even success in business or relationships. It's for your survival and your safety. And it will warn you of any impending danger in your external environment with feeling states. In a building, you have the fire alarm. Someone pulls a fire alarm, you get the sirens and the lights. When we feel or sense external danger, we'll get a warning signal through our body, but of anxiety, of fear, of anger, of overwhelm, of worry. The problem is the mind can't tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And so on the more clinical side of this, we can use that to our advantage. And just like a nightmare, no matter how crazy, Wizard of Oz trees chasing down the street, throwing apples at you, or a hot dog chasing down the street or something ridiculous, it'll change your physiology in the middle of sleep. Brain starts creating the adrenaline, the cortisol, those neural peptides, molecules of fear and anxiety, 300% more blood moving the big muscles of your arms and legs, so to fight or to escape, all because of a ridiculous nightmare is happening. Your mind thinks it's true, so it does that shoot first, ask questions later. Change your physiology through thought alone. So we use this to our advantage in therapeutic hypnosis, and we can access subconscious mind by quieting down that conscious level of mind. Also, you can take it a little deeper, and by quieting down that conscious level of mind, moving inward, you can actually access what some call the superconscious level of mind, or your higher self, or that inner sight or inner wisdom, whatever you want to call it, third eye, activate third eye, or the pineal gland, or whatever, however you want to direct the conversation and terminology you want to use. But by moving deep into a trance state or the state of hypnosis or that meditative state, whatever you want to call it, you can access that part of you that has been set up to do this work, the spiritual work. And I believe, and unless there's an extraordinary issue, maybe around like schizophrenia or extraordinary bipolar disorder or something like that, or traumatic brain injury, we all have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, And especially, and I'm sure you've seen this in your work, the more you practice something, the better you get at it. And whether you, of course, you're doing it yourself or you're showing somebody else how to do this stuff, it's like what is strongest within your mind is what you do over and over again.
Yeah.
So what you practice, you get better at. So by practicing these levels of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, whether it's moving down towards alpha or theta, or moving up towards those gamma and super gamma levels of brainwave states uh, that we see some of the Tibetan meditators from the Himalayas access,
Mm.
that state of that in this uh, in the zone, or in that really creative state of mind.
Yeah.
And either way, it seems to be a doorway to accessing these higher realms,
Yeah.
and can be really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in there that we could really circle around quite a bit. A few things that really stand out. Firstly, as you were talking about that process of coming to that inner self and the capacity that we have to return there. Something that my teacher always says, and that's really become kind of central to how I teach Reiki, is that healing is remembering the wholeness of our true self, and that,
Mm.
that there is this center, there is this whole and true self that is always present, and that we become distracted from and we become disconnected consciously from. And so many layers of distraction and challenge, and trauma, of course, being something that fractures our mind, heart, and body from each other, and that reintegrating those aspects of ourself is how we remember that whole true self that never left, that's always present, and thereby bring ourselves back into full capacity, and really be in that fully activated space.
Yeah.
And that so many of these practices really are about learning how to focus our attention, how to focus our mind, how to put our body in a particular posture that helps the mind and the body come together, using the breath to help be that point of focus,
Mhm.
which is connected to the energy. And that description that you used of the Gothic cathedrals really stood out to me. I'm a art history major by training from my undergraduate studies, and spent a lot of time studying Gothic cathedrals and the
Mhm.
art of that time period and many others. And that characteristic, that you're speaking of those incredibly tall, narrow buildings and those beautiful windows that end in that pointed arch, did have that quality and that intention of drawing the eye upward. And I love the way that you described it, because we always looked at that as intentionally drawing our attention to heaven and putting our attention towards God. And, part of the rabbit hole that my mind was going down as you were saying that is that, for me, spirituality and religion and these practices and traditions that have their uniqueness in cultures and time and place, but have so many similarities as well. So much of that must have been a person has an incredible experience that's unexplainable, and then they try to
Mm.
share it, they try to explain it, they try to repeat it in their own experience, and that becomes systems and structures and patterns that can be shared and passed along. And so I can imagine, somebody having the experience of, their eyes traveling up the side of a redwood tree, or their attention being gathered by, some incredible phenomenon happening in the sky, and having that sense of that brain state shifting, because of that physiological, that gesture, that movement, that posture of the body of looking upward. They had an experience that felt awe-inspiring and
Mhm.
unexplainable, and then
Yeah.
sought to explain it, right? And then sought to duplicate it. And so dedicating the kind of time and effort that was needed to build those cathedrals, was that way of bringing everybody into that space, however we define it, right? Bringing our eyes
Mhm.
closer to God, or, invoking inside of ourselves a biological response to a gesture.
Yeah.
However it is we want to understand it, the results, is similar. And when I talked about the energy map that we follow within the system of Reiki, you can see that as well. And it begins with that rooted place, like making sure that we do have our roots in the ground, that we do feel stable and secure and held, that we're on a firm foundation, that we have resources and nourishment. That's in the first diamond, the first energy center in our low belly. So all of the practices begin focusing our attention in that place. And as you say, the repetition of practice, getting that muscle memory of being able to drop into that center, in any moment without even really thinking of it. Once we have that established, the next place we go is up, to your
Yeah.
second diamond, the energy centers in our head, and of course the spacious places beyond that. And when we have that rooted foundation and then draw our attention upward in that way, it shifts the chemistry inside of us, as you're saying. You're giving us a little bit of a glimpse on both the clinical and the spiritual side of like what actually happens when we focus our attention in that way. And then once those two places are in balance with each other, they're in harmony with each other, then we come to the third diamond, which is the heart, and that's that territory of connection, and that territory where these broken places, or these places that feel broken but aren't actually, can reknit, and we can reach back out to each other. And so these structures that are designed to bring about a certain shift or a certain realization, a certain direct experience inside of us, getting explained and facilitated through so many different pathways, but really landing us in that same place of remembering the wholeness of our true self, and therefore feeling ourselves to be, much more expansive and connected and resourced than we might otherwise feel in our day-to-day life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that interesting also, the whole moving upwards as you expand your energy, because I'm always fascinated by this story in the Bible. And I don't know, the Bible and even the word God or Christianity can be triggering for some people because of the experiences they have. But it's not what I'm moving towards. But what I'm wanted to just throw out there is a very specific story. And again, somebody maybe put in the comments which book of the Bible. I think it's in Mark. It's only in two of the books, or in one of the Gospels, the Transfiguration. And Transfiguration of Jesus is that story where Jesus and three of the disciples go up to a mountaintop, and he becomes an energy being of light and moves upward, and has a powwow with Elijah and Moses. And then there's a strange story of it's Peter, John, and I don't know, Thomas maybe. I forget the three, but Peter, John, and one of the other disciples are like, oh, maybe we should build three tents or three houses. And then Jesus comes and has to tell them, no, you three are idiots. And this is all about this energy and transfiguration and moving. And then we get to the Last Supper and the bread and the wine and the crucifixion. And this whole story of the transfiguration seems to get missed. And it also seems to be very, very incomplete. Seems like there's something missing from this story. It just is one of those weird little, I don't know, is this some sort of metaphor? Is this a teaching story? Is it an allegory? What's the symbolism behind this? It's just this, I'm going to the mountaintop and I'm becoming a being of light. And then it seems like the end of his mission is there. That seems to me, this is me talking, Craig Merriweather, here in Flagstaff, Arizona, sitting here on this day in beginning of July. This is just my personal, humble, non-professional opinion about this. That seems to be the most important story in the Gospels, is the transfiguration. Is like, how are we able to turn or attune ourselves to this energy, become this enlightened being of energy, and become this being of light, of white robes, and whatever the metaphor is, or the vision is. And I've been always curious about this because it does seem like something's been edited out of that. What are we missing from that? And why are we always focusing on the cross and the communion, which is a lovely ritual? It's a beautiful ritual. But what about why is our attention being taken away from becoming this energy, becoming these spiritual energy beings? How do we do that? Has something been taken away? Are we just missing it some way with the translation, or it's all out of order somehow? Somebody tripped and the pages all fell apart and they put it together in the wrong way. And why is it only in one or two of the books, not all four? So when you were talking just right then about the energy, especially about I know there's different energy systems, but usually there's always seems to be an energy system around the crown that denotes that higher realm, and that um, enlightenment as well as access to maybe the more spiritual realms, that I think Reiki, as my understanding of it, is very helpful in not only clearing yourself, but helping you access that. I think hypnotherapy can help guide you to that. But I think in terms of the moving your energy in that direction, I think Reiki can be obviously has to be very, very helpful in helping to achieve that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this, this theme, this thread in here around, how do the stories that we tell influence how we think about these themes and about what our role in them is. And, I am not a Christian. I'm not a Christian scholar, but I am Christian interested because it's such a powerful influence on our life. And there's
Yeah.
great beauty inside of those traditions. And the way in which those stories were, written down originally and then translated countless times, there's agenda inside of that, right?
Mhm.
There's people's intention that gets woven in, and there's debate about that. I have people in my life who would hotly contest what I just said. No, there is no agenda. It is just strictly
Mhm.
transcribed exactly as God intended it to be. And so respecting that position, my curiosity, and the operating assumption that I've always had is that, humans wrote it down and and
Yeah.
embedded some form of their agenda into that. And so we see this, this debate that shows up inside of these spaces around to what degree humans, we average folk, are intended to be able to see ourselves actually embodied in the example of Jesus. We're meant to follow his teachings, but there are those who believe that we're actually meant to be a reflection of his capacities as well,
Mhm.
and those who say that we're not. I'm not particularly interested in that debate, but what I am interested in is the way in which we see that reflected in other traditions, and the way in which, for me, taking the perspective that these stories, whether, to whatever degree they are or are not literal truth, but the way in which they are reflecting something real, that, some experience that people had and again wanted to convey and, make available to others. This instruction to, in some way be like the people that are being described. And within the system of Reiki, again, very similar to Celtic traditions, you have this very nature-based emphasis and this invitation really to look to nature as our guide, as, how we can reach those states of bigger than we believe ourselves to be, or
Yeah.
in other words, enlightenment. And so, we look to these natural metaphors. We look to, the shape of a tree and the way that a tree is rooted, and it's also reaching up towards the heavens, and it's also connected into the web of life. And we're invited to see ourselves reflected in that, to see ourselves as having that capacity, to see, if we look to the very first Celtic Christian traditions, we look to the idea of God within and God before us and beside us and behind us and above us and below us and inside of us, and therefore able to be reflected in our day-to-day life. And really, that's kind of what matters, right? To what degree we can
Mhm.
live our life in the day-to-day and the challenges and distractions and the joys and the decisions that we have to make and the actions that we have to take and the difficult things that we have to do. To what degree can we be a reflection of these images that are given to us? And when you talk about that moment, that story and that moment of Jesus becoming, energy, like dropping
Mhm.
the physical form, becoming light, and then returning, and being able to be in both of those states and then report back from those states. To me, I see an invitation to explore that ourselves, and an invitation that there's something inside of us that has that capacity. If for no other reason, then somebody maybe had an experience like that or witnessed it and they wrote it down in the form of a story and gave it to
Mhm.
somebody else who got to read it and think about it. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, this theme of the relationship that we as these limited, fragile, time-bound humans have with something bigger and more infinite, that might exist purely in our own mind and our own imagination, or it might exist on a spiritual plane that we're not fully capable of understanding, or it might exist in some other way. But I think the thing that matters is that it does exist, and it's something that we can be in relationship with and have curiosity about. And then, hey, people over time have created systems of practice that allow us to step inside of it in our experiences.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find that that story significant as you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And whether it was a actual event or it's more of a metaphor of how to see our energy system and what we can become. What I get from a lot of those stories that I grew up with in the Bible, especially in the Gospels, is that it's that old thing of like, well, if I can do this, you can do it too. And I get that from a lot of the stories about and Jesus. I don't mean make this a conversation about Jesus. It's just that's what I grew up with. That's my heritage. I seem to be moving back in that direction
Yeah, yeah.
because that just fits my heritage and that and it fascinates me, um, especially about the when you look at energy in the Bible, and I'm talking like systems of like Reiki or moving energy through the body, like you may tap into with acupuncture and the more traditional Chinese medicine, things like that. Are there instances where you can kind of point to and say, I think that has something to do with the energy systems of the body, where you're looking at the chakras or maybe the more Western Golden Dawn aspects of the five centers of energy in the body? It's like, is it possible that by tuning up, if you will, or rebooting or energizing these chakras or these energy centers, or even if it's just the heart or the pineal gland, the heart, the crown chakra, and resetting these, can we also access those times of enlightenment? And what I also find interesting about again, going just back to transfiguration, is because I find it such an odd story. It didn't last forever. It wasn't that, okay, well, this is it, and I'm going to do the transfiguration and see you all later.
Right.
Have a nice life. It was like he came back down and started walking around again, you know, and then he completed the last year of his life or last few months of his life, whatever the timetable is. And so I can see that again, the story isn't just you get to a point and then you just become an energy being of enlightenment. It's like you can access those points through the work you do, with the meditation work you do, the energy work you do, the of course the physical exercise you do of exercise and or yoga or martial arts or dance or whatever you're doing. You can access those points, but there will probably be a time when you come back down and you got to go back. It's the whole thing. Enlightenment, for enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. After enlightenment, carry water, chop wood. And so you can do the transfiguration. You can become this energy being and have that experience, and maybe again reset your heart, reset your mind, reset your spirit. But then you're going back for the chores of the day and picking up the kids from school and having to do the dishes and clean up the garage.
I think that's such an essential perspective, an essential bridge between the like enormity of the stories that we're referencing here and the enormity of the experiences that we're talking about, which show up, again in their own iteration and in our varied cultures. But bringing that down to like, and what does this have to do with my day-to-day life? Because if it's
Mm.
not relevant to my day-to-day life, it's of limited usefulness to the majority of us. And reference with Buddhism, Reiki comes from a foundation of Buddhism, of Japanese Shingon Buddhism in particular, and indigenous Shinto practice. And I was just kind of chuckling to myself as you were talking about that, quality of like having this transcendental experience and then coming back down to earth and carrying on with his day. I remember my original, like when I first read Siddhartha and I started, as a
Mm.
child
Yeah, that book.
about what Buddhism is, I distinctly had this impression that, he sat down beneath that tree and meditated himself into enlightenment and then what, evaporated into thin air.
Mm.
Like, I had this like, well, he must have died and went to heaven then, right? That's what
Yeah,
they're talking about, right? No, he got up and went back
yeah,
to life, and that
yeah.
idea that We don't have to escape from our life in order to feel ourselves as possessing and embodying these characteristics, however they might be described. Buddhism describes them a particular way. Christianity describes them a particular way. Within the system of Reiki, there's a set of 5 precepts that describes this is how you're going to feel and how you're going to behave when you have reached enlightenment, right? It is in essence an enlightenment practice coming from that foundation. And so to what degree can we be going through our day-to-day life, chopping wood, carrying water, picking up the kids, doing the dishes, and be unattached to our fear and our anger, and be rooted in gratitude and deeply compassionate, and be true to ourselves and diligent in that, and be reflecting the teachings of Jesus or whoever it is that is our particular model. And so it's so important, I think, to bring it back to that and to share the example that you're sharing of, having this moment of like, that's right, there's the wholeness of my true self. I remember it, I feel it, I am embodying it, and carrying on with what I need to.
Yeah.
And when I think about, a practice like hypnosis or a practice like Reiki, being able to hold spaces for people to have those experiences and then bring them into the day to day, that's where life change happens. I would imagine is what you see for folks.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seemed, in terms of that story, very much of let's go out into nature. Let's have this experience. Whether you call it a retreat. I don't know if that lasted for days or just a couple of hours. But it's just like, let's take a couple of people. It wasn't all 12. It wasn't a big, huge group of people. It was just a handful that he felt connected with so he could have this experience out in nature. I don't know, come back down, shake it off, and let's walk back and let's get to business again. And and maybe that's just, maybe it's not possible even to live in that realm all the time where you just fry our system, you know. Uh, and maybe that's why that is. But we can access these experiences, recharge ourselves, reset ourselves, reboot the system, heart, mind, body, soul, and this energy system that we have by doing these maybe rituals or retreats or meditations, whatever you want to call them, on a semi-regular basis, if not regular basis. Maybe that's why, maybe finding something once a week, whether it's a community of people that you can meditate with or pray together with or sing together with, or maybe it's something you do off on your own, maybe finding a place in nature where you can go meditate or write or sing on your own or whatever. But by finding these opportunities to live life as we have to, with all the that we're being berated with over social media and the news and things. I mean, just think that we're getting more information in just a single day than most people got in a year or even maybe a lifetime just 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And we have to somehow deal with this noise. And by quieting down that conscious level of mind, again, whether you call it hypnosis or move into various techniques of hypnosis or techniques of meditation or techniques of ritual, by quieting down that consciousness and moving inwards, I think we're more able, obviously, to reset, but we have to do it. It's something that I don't think a lot of us allow ourselves to do until it gets to be a problem, and then we have to go see Michaela for an appointment to like, please,
Exactly.
I don't know, I'm like, ready to punch a hole in the wall, or I hurt, I'm in pain, because we don't give ourselves permission
Yeah.
to take time. And yes, I get it. You don't have an hour and a half every day. It's not like you're the Dalai Lama who has a staff of people who can find him 3 hours every day to meditate. Doesn't have he's not married, doesn't have kids, has a staff of people to find his time. So yeah, he can meditate every day. But I think the example that we can take from the Dalai Lama, as that popped into my head, you know, man's 89 years old and he's still meditating every day, you know, and read his books. He talks about the anger and he talks about the sorrow and the despair. There's still a lot of unfortunate stuff going on in Tibet. A lot of, monasteries still been bulldozed down to build freeways, and monks being arrested and tortured. And he's a human being. Of course, he's going to, feel that sorrow and despair. He was exiled out of Tibet in what, like 1958, 1957, something like that. And of course, he's going to feel anger. He's a human being, and it's a natural response to an extraordinary situation. It would be odd if he didn't feel anger or sorrow, despair, or grief or sadness around that. But he doesn't want that to be who he is. And so every day he practices loving kindness and compassion. And you look at a master of anything, whether it's music or dance or martial arts or whatever, they're always practicing. Whether you're a 10th degree black belt in Taekwondo or you're a extraordinary masterful musician like Yo-Yo Ma, considered the greatest cello player alive today, or one of them at least, he's practicing 3 to 4 hours every day. Taekwondo master or judo master or whatever, they're practicing every day.
Yeah.
And so by taking a little bit of time for yourself, even if it's just maybe 5, 10 minutes, if that's all you got, use that time to find some way to reset yourself,
Yeah.
reset your energy, reset your heart, reset, or even if it's just to sit quietly and maybe listen to the wind blow through the trees.
Mhm.
Again, we're in an extraordinary time of too much information, and just because of the times we're in, I find myself twice a day looking at the news. What's happening? What's going on? And I see the fear that creeps up when I do that. And of course, we have to be informed. I don't know that we need to be inundated.
Yeah.
And I there are days when I don't find myself doing the practice, and I suffer for it,
Yeah.
I think if anybody, it was there was just one thing and to take away, hopefully just give yourself permission, be compassionate towards yourself.
Yeah.
And if you just find 5, 10 minutes, if that's all you got, use the in-between times. And if you're sitting in the carpool lane, or not the carpool lane, but the pickup lane to pick up your kids from school, and you're, 20th car in line, just use that time instead of getting frustrated and angry and getting on your phone to look up what's going on. And could you close your eyes and take a deep breath and just ground yourself to where you are in that moment? And I know it's not a cathedral, I know it's not a beautiful temple, but can you set your car up to be maybe a more relaxed place to be,
Yeah.
and have some clues, whether it's a little something or other to hang from your rear view mirror, or put near your speedometer or something to just remind you that you are a being of energy, and that by resetting yourself multiple times a month, if not multiple times a week, if not multiple times a day, you can maybe, I don't know, maybe we can all, reach that point where we're not only energizing ourselves, but we can transfigure our own selves.
I
Yeah.
think that's such an important place for us to land, on this,
Yeah.
um, this invitation for each of us to find the way to incorporate these things into our life in ways that are accessible. And I love the idea of, balancing the willingness to give ourselves an extended time, go on a retreat, have time outside of our normal routine, and use that time to, not only recharge, but to reset our intention so that as we come back into life, we don't consider those to be two separate spaces, right? That it's not that we have to, push and grind until we're in pain, as you said, and we're so stressed out, burning out, and then we go retreat and recover and then come back and grind again. But we remind ourselves that we're actually meant to be grounded and spacious and connected all of the time, and that how we get there is in practice. And that
Mm.
practice, as
Yeah.
you say, can take place in tiny little pieces of time. But when we do it diligently enough, the fifth precept says, just for today, I am diligent in being in the other precepts, then it becomes that muscle memory, it becomes that habit, and we're more likely to drop into our breath or drop into a moment of casting our eyes upward and feeling that sensation in our body, leaning into connection, whatever our practice looks like in that moment, taking a moment to contemplate the precepts or whatever other spiritual text speaks to us in that moment. It becomes routine. It becomes how we live our life, and that changes everything about how we live our life. And the example of the writings of the Dalai Lama, the Book of Joy, which tracks the conversations between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu around the subject of joy. How do we live our lives in a state of happiness, alongside of everything that is happening that can be challenging to that happiness, is one of the texts that I return to over and over and over again and teach from routinely. And those passages where, these two of the greatest spiritual leaders of our time who are, in the public that we many of us
Right.
know about. There are many great spiritual leaders that are lesser known, but when they talk candidly about those moments when they feel anger, those moments when grief or despair are present, and how do they navigate that? How do they honor
Yeah.
themselves as humans, but also step into the legacies that they are in practice of, and then help to pass that on to us? And that idea that, as you say, the only difference is perhaps more access to time and to focus and context, but that each of us have these capacities, which is really where you started us, that we each have
Yeah.
this capacity to be in a different state of mind that is one that's designed to heal, and that's designed to bring us back into balance, that's designed to help us remember the wholeness of our self.
Yeah, yeah, I like to use the word diligent. The word I use with my clients, people I work with one on one, is relentlessness.
Mhm.
And there's a certain relentlessness to this work. The Dalai Lama is 89 years old and he's still meditating. Before he passed, I'm sure uh, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was praying and doing his work in the way he needed to do it. There's a relentlessness to this work, whether you're focusing on mind, body, spirit, your emotions. The Dalai Lama still meditates every day. The man's 89 years old. He's not married. He doesn't have kids. He's been had a staff of people to meet his every need and want since he's probably 5 or 6 years old. And I'm not saying it was the easiest of lives, especially being exiled and out of Tibet at kind of a young age and having to
Certainly.
deal with that. But it, he has kind of been able to set himself up to do the work. And a lot of us aren't as fortunate
Yeah.
because of life and bills and mortgages and kids and elderly parents. And often we don't give ourselves the the compassion to give ourselves 10, 15 minutes to just reset ourselves. But if you don't, the volume is just going to get turned up on the hurt and the pain. And then, yeah, and certainly whether you're seeking help through Reiki or hypnotherapy or some other healing modality, is there to help you. But there's again a certain relentlessness to keeping your energy system stable, if nothing else, by doing some sort of practice. And it could just be writing in a journal or drawing or singing at the top of your lungs as you're stuck in rush hour traffic. Maybe not Norwegian death metal, but maybe you're singing a positive song, Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves or something. Uh,
Yeah.
Play some monkeys or something and just sing at the top of your lungs and just feel how much better that makes you feel.
Well, and what
Just
you're
go for a
speaking to
walk.
is that, the good news here is that these practices, by and large, are very simple. The,
Yeah,
the fact that it not being easy is in our mindset and our ability and willingness to take that time, right? But the practices themselves are very simple. And there are
yeah,
so many simple, accessible practices that, when repeated and when repeated with intention, absolutely shift our physiology towards balance and wholeness and health. And I love that you do that work in the realm of both spirit and science and
yeah.
medicine and coaching, and get to be an advocate for that. So if folks want to connect with you, want to learn more about your work, want to work with you perhaps, or learn from you, how's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Oh, probably the best way is my website for hypnotherapy. It's Arizona Integrative Hypnotherapy. Divinus Arcana is the more mystical side of the hypnotherapy work I do. Of course, you can find me on Facebook, uh, things like that. Probably the easiest way to find me is through my test anxiety course, acentest.com. That's easy to remember, easy to spell, acentest.com, and you can find my email through there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, links for all of that will be down below in the description so that you all can find it very easily. And I'm sure that there has been something in this conversation that has sparked something for everybody watching this. And I really encourage you to share that with us, to ask your questions, to share your insights, to share your own practices, what has helped you to remain in this space in your own life. Do please share those with us in the comments down below. Reach out if you have questions or you want to be in touch. And I hope that something in this conversation has nourished you, has provisioned you. And as you go throughout your day, may you be deeply provisioned for whatever this day has for you. Thanks so much for being with us. And thank you, Craig, so much for.
Um, Thank you, Michaela. I really appreciate the conversation and taking the time to talk with me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, folks, until next time, we love you. Goodbye.